Hi there, thanks for joining me on this tropical weather impact. It's Wednesday, September the 3rd. I'm meteorologist Payton Malone. You're looking at a skyline of New Orleans with lots of sunshine. In fact, we had one of our coolest mornings in 3 months here on the Gulf Coast. So we got a little taste of fall, but even though we're getting those little tastes of fall, it's still very much summer. It's still very much hurricane season. So here's what's coming up on this episode of Tropical Weather Impact. We're going to talk about an East Pacific storm, Hurricane Lorena, and how we're going to watch some of that moisture actually move into parts of Texas and maybe Louisiana early next week. We'll talk about how that could fuel some rain. The Atlantic, well, we're looking at a storm developing out there too. And the good news is, while we will likely have a storm out there soon, there are no immediate threats to the United States. We'll talk about why the Caribbean islands need to keep a closer eye on that feature, though. So let's start with Hurricane Lorena. This is a Category 1 storm as of Wednesday morning. It's currently sitting just southwest of Cabo San Lucas there. It's going to pass over the Baja Peninsula there and over into northern Mexico. Now, the center of this storm is going to be disrupted and torn apart, and there won't be any circulation left from it. But what will exist is all the moisture from this hurricane that's going to pass into Texas and then get spread out over the northern Gulf as we go into early next week. So this is going to fuel some rain chances for Texas and the Gulf Coast region as we head towards the end of the weekend and early next week. Now, you have to watch these things because you do have a lot of tropical moisture coming in. You can see there the hurricane may even strengthen some more before it moves inland and dissipates, but that moisture is going to fuel some rain here. So look at the picture right now. We've got a lot of dry air from Texas back through the Gulf Coast region. That's the old frontal boundary that moved through earlier this week. That's Hurricane Lorena and all its deep tropical moisture. Now, that moisture is going to move up into northern Mexico. It's got to pass through some higher elevation. That's why it looks like it disappears. But look in Texas by Sunday, Saturday into Sunday, we'll say there's extra tropical moisture, maybe some heavy showers around this weekend across Texas. And then here across the Gulf Coast region in Louisiana, Mississippi, you could see some of that tropical moisture getting strung out across our area. At the same time, there's going to be a cold front moving through. This will move through around Monday, and so it's not going to be as hot next week. But with that tropical moisture and with that front, I do think there's a decent chance of some scattered showers across the Gulf Coast. Now, something interesting next week will be to watch anytime you get the residual moisture from an old hurricane and a cool front coming down, you have to watch the western Gulf, specifically the tail end of these fronts. This time of year, we can get these spin-up systems that can try to form on these tail ends of this front. And there have been some models showing some weak low pressure trying to form in the western Gulf early next week. This specific model shows we've got some pooling of moisture there. So we'll have to keep an eye on this pattern. Not sure it's going to develop into anything significant, but I do think maybe something to watch in the tropics early next week, a bit closer to home. So that's what we're tracking on the Pacific side of things that could have an influence on the Atlantic side. Now let's talk about what the National Hurricane Center is watching on the Atlantic side, because they think this is going to be our next named storm at some point in the next 7 days. Now they're still only giving it a very low chance for the next 48 hours of it developing. When you look at it on satellite, it's not organized. You basically have an unorganized area of showers and storms, a tropical wave, monsoonal trough there with disturbed weather north of the equator. Now we do think part of this is going to try to break off and spin up, and that would likely happen here by this weekend or early next week. So by next Wednesday, 1 week from today, we very well could have a depression or a named storm somewhere near or just north of the Caribbean islands. There's the Lesser Antilles, there's Puerto Rico, there's the Virgin Islands, and so they're going to be watching this very closely. Now, we still have a solid week to watch this before maybe there's ever a threat to the islands. And there may never be a threat to the islands. That's the thing with this, is we aren't quite sure how quickly it's going to turn. We do see plenty of opportunity for it to turn. It's just how fast does that happen? I do think the turn and when that happens is going to be based on how quickly this thing strengthens. When you look at our models, we have a good idea on how this plays out with regard to steering currents. So let's fast forward the next few days. You can see they both agree we've got slow organization. Here we are this weekend. You start to see a well-defined disturbance there. Fast forward even more. All right, our models are starting to separate. Why are they starting to separate there? Well, they disagree on how strong this could be. So let's look at around Tuesday or next Monday into Tuesday. The GFS is further north. The GFS does have it a bit stronger. The European model has a much weaker system struggling to organize. And so the reason the GFS is pulling north faster is because there's a stronger system and it feels the tug to the north from an upper level low. And so the GFS, that's why it's trending further north quicker. The European model in green has a system weaker, therefore getting further west. This is a classic setup of a stronger storm curves faster, a weaker system gets closer to the Caribbean. We got to watch this because both of these solutions are still possible. A lot of our models do show it turning, it's just where does it turn? There are some solutions that bring it closer to the islands by the middle and end of next week. This is 1 week from it today, September 11th and 12th. We very well could have a system somewhere in this zone, depending on how strong it is. So a stronger system probably curving faster, a weaker system trying to get closer to the islands there. And again, that's in about a week to a week and a couple of days. So why do we think the turn is the most likely scenario? Well, the steering currents support a turn. Now, in the near term, they don't. You've got a ridge of high pressure extending ahead of this thing, which means it's going to struggle to get latitude for a while. The weaker it stays, the further under that ridge it stays trapped. Notice this, though. This is a big trough of low pressure. That's why we have these cool fronts that have been coming down across the United States. Now, we go out in time, does that trough stay there? It looks like we may still have a troughing feature off the East Coast, which means anything far out is not coming into that trough. It's getting blocked by the trough and coming around the ridge of high pressure. And so this is next Wednesday, looking at one specific model run, but many are showing we've still got the ridge, but we've got a big weakness and a trough. So anytime we've got a trough like that digging down and there's a system out here, it is never going to make it to the United States. It is going to curve out around that ridge of high pressure. And so that's the type of pattern you want to see. Now, the fine details like how strong the storm is, how quickly the turn happens, those are a bit harder to determine at this point because we just don't have a disturbance to even track really. But that'll be the big question mark, is how close does it get to the islands before it does start to make that turn around the ridge of high pressure. But that right there is our saving grace in the U.S. And it's just a reminder, the further and further we get out in hurricane season, as we go more into September, you start to have more troughs and cold fronts. And therefore, anything this far out, it's very, very difficult for it to come right at the U.S. Now, it can happen. We can have ridges of high pressure over this part of the United States in our cooler months, but what we're looking at right now, the data supports a curve out to sea with this troughing. We just hope these pattern trends continue. You know, we take these things day by day. Models do change. The timing of all this changes. It's all about timing. And so if anything slows down or speeds up, then we can have adjustments. But we do like what we're seeing. And this is just one specific model run. When you look at the ensemble models, or a lot of people call them the spaghetti plots, nearly every single spaghetti plot does show it curving at some point. Some just disagree. Again, some curve it a little slower and bring it towards the islands. Some bring it to a stronger storm or faster and curves out to sea faster. And so that would be best case scenario, is for it to strengthen faster and get out to sea. I'm not convinced that's going to be the case here. I would see a solution maybe where it stays a bit weaker and does get closer to the islands, at least maybe near or north of them, in about a week's time. So that's towards the second week and the peak of hurricane season. That's what the islands are watching here along the northern Gulf. I don't have any immediate threats. We'll watch the remnant moisture of Lorena try to push through Texas, and that old cold front next week in the northern Gulf. We'll keep an eye on that to make sure it doesn't do anything sneaky, because, well, they do sometimes do things that are a bit sneaky. Just a reminder as we continue to head through hurricane season, what we watch here closer to home, anytime we do have a potential system in the Gulf, off the East Coast, mainly to the west of the 65-degree longitude line, we really, really watch these things closely. That's more of an immediate concern. There's really not much happening there other than some old fronts and old frontal lows trying to form, but I don't think those are going to blow up in anything major. And when they're a bit closer, more so when you have something in the Caribbean or about to enter the Caribbean islands, we watch that a bit closer here. That could have an impact within a week or so to the U.S. And then when you've got the feature like we have now, which is way, way out in the Atlantic basin, it's currently sitting it's closer to the continent of Africa than the Caribbean islands. It's simply worth a mention for the United States. Now, for the islands itself, it's a bit closer. You need to be following this closer, and we'll keep you updated the rest of this week. But we are feeling okay as hurricane season 2025 rolls on. Next name on the list, by the way, is Gabrielle, and then after Gabrielle is Umberto. And just a reminder, we are still in the peak of hurricane season. we still have a solid 2 months before we will start to write things off and focus more on all these big cold fronts and the chilly weather headed our way in the next few months. But that's where we stand for your tropical weather impact on this Wednesday, September the 3rd. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you right back here tomorrow, same place, same time.